All right, welcome back to the video lecture series for Philosophy 102, Ethics. In this lesson, we are going to return to discussing utilitarianism, and we're going to do so by focusing specifically on what I call the utilitarian principle of equality. And in this lesson, I'm really going to focus on explaining that principle, and then in the videos subsequent to this, we're going to take a look at some specific applications of this principle. Specifically, what implications does this principle have for a possible duty to give to charity? And what possible implications might this principle have for how we treat non-human animals? But in this video, we're just going to focus on the principle itself, try to get a good understanding of what it means. Okay, so first, let's recall to ourselves just the main points we've made about utilitarianism so far. So, according to Mill, utilitarianism implies that the ethically good or correct action is whatever produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. And as we've discussed so far, we've already talked about two of the elements of utilitarianism. So the one we talked about last week was hedonism. Right, so hedonism is the idea that the only intrinsic value, good or value, is pleasure. What makes a human life go well is pleasure, and we talked about that in the context of could a pleasurable life be a meaningful life? Right? So, but however we answer that question, what utilitarians think is that a person's life or any being's life goes well to the extent that it's feeling pleasure. Utilitarians are also consequentialists, and I've mentioned this term briefly, but we haven't done too much with it yet. But consequentialism, you'll recall, is the idea that when we're looking at an action, and we're trying to determine whether it's good or bad, all that matters is the consequences of that action. The intent behind the action is irrelevant. The motive behind the action is irrelevant. All that matters are the consequences. And we're going to take a much deeper look at that part of utilitarianism next week when we talk specifically about the ethics of euthanasia. But for now, if we just take these two components together, consequentialism and hedonism, if you say, okay, the consequences are what matters, and I know a good consequence is one that brings about pleasure, a bad consequence is one that brings about pain, then the next question would be, well, whose happiness, whose pleasure matters? When I'm making a moral decision, who do I have to think about? Just myself? My friends and family and acquaintances? People in my city, my state, my country? People in my species? Non-human animals? Trees, ecosystems, right? How far does our sphere of concern, how far does our sphere of moral concern extend? And utilitarians hold by what I'll call the utilitarian principle of equality. So here's what the principle says. When you're making a moral decision, one must take into consideration every being whose interest can be influenced by that decision, and consider the interests of every such being equally. So whenever you're making any moral decision, you're saying, oh, should I tell a lie in this instance? Or a topic that'll be important for us soon, do I have an obligation to give to charity? When you're making decisions like that, the question, and you say, okay, I need to produce good consequences, that means I need to produce pleasure in the absence of pain. Whose pleasure matters? The answer for the utilitarian is the pleasure of every single individual who can be influenced by your decision. Now, the first thing you should notice is this seems to draw the scope of moral concern quite wide. Because, especially in the context of what we're going to be talking about, which is giving to charity, helping other people, insofar as you're a person with disposable income, insofar as you're a person who has any extra resources, you are a person who is in a position to help a wide range of other people. And not just people you know, not just people in your town, not just people in your city or your state or your country, but people all over the world. So every day when we make a whole myriad of decisions, those are decisions that directly or indirectly can have an influence on other people. You are in a position where, depending on how you spend your money, how you spend your time, how you spend your energy, you can or cannot produce more happiness in the world. You can or cannot help other people. And if we take the utilitarian principle of equality seriously, then Do you have to care about yourself? Sure. Do you have to care about your friends and family? Sure. People in your neighboring town, your city, your state, your country? Sure. You have to care about all those people, but the interests of those people are no more or less important than any other sentient being who you can affect by your actions. So the first thing to say is that from the outset, it seems like the principle of equality might require actually a great deal of sacrifice on our part. And this is actually one of the things that we see Mill addressing in Chapter 2 of Utilitarianism. All right, so let's take a look at this passage. He's addressing this idea, does the principle of equality demand too much self-sacrifice? He says, though it is only in a very imperfect state of the world's arrangements that anyone can best serve the happiness of others by the absolute sacrifice of his own. So first, just to make clear what he's saying there, he's saying it's only, the reason he's talking about this imperfect state of the world's arrangements is because he says in a more perfect world, there wouldn't be maybe so many people in poverty, so many people suffering, so many people going through such hard times that we can imagine could be ameliorated if we all work together. So it's only because the world is a very imperfect place that we are in a position where we may be able to help others and increase their happiness. Okay, but he says, yet so long as the world is in that imperfect state, I fully acknowledge that the readiness to make such a sacrifice of your own pleasure for the sake of others is the highest virtue which can be found in man. And this should make some sense, right? He's saying that self-sacrifice, the ability to put your interests aside and help others, bring more pleasure and happiness into the world, he's saying this is the highest virtue which can be found in man. And that makes sense if you're a utilitarian. If you're a utilitarian, what morality is about is increasing the total amount of happiness. And so if you're willing to sacrifice your own interests for the sake of a larger amount of others, then you are perfectly embodying the utilitarian view or mode of morality. Now, so at this point you might say, well, that's all fine and good, but utilitarianism is no longer sounding so attractive. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm constantly sacrificing my own interests for the sake of others. What about my life? What about my happiness? And interestingly, Mill also tries to make the claim here that in fact the surest path to happiness is a path of self-sacrifice. He says, I will add that in this condition of the world, paradoxical as the assertion may be, the conscious ability to do without happiness gives the best prospect of realizing such happiness as is attainable. For nothing except that consciousness can raise a person above the chances of life. So what is he saying? He's saying the ability to do without happiness in some sense can raise you above a person above the chances of life. So what is he saying? Well, we all suffer misfortunes. Things don't go our way. And one of the things that we need to think about is how can we retain our happiness? How can we live a happy life in the face of those things not going our way? And I think the easiest example here is to say, well, let's say there's a very desirable job interview that you would very much like to have. It's part of your self-conception that you want to get this job. You've been working for it for a very long time. It's extremely important to you. You think the work is quite valuable. All those things. And you would very much like to have that job. Now, as things stand, as things in the world go, there's no guarantee that you'll succeed in that. In fact, if there's a large number of other applicants, if many other people want the same thing, it's quite likely that you very well may fail. And of course, if you're completely invested in this sort of project, if your happiness is entirely tied up in, am I successful in attaining this one goal, then if you don't attain that goal, it's very likely your happiness will be undermined. It's very likely that the path you went on trying to live a good life will no longer be realized. So he says instead, well, how can you protect yourself against things not going the way you want? Here's something you might think about. Why is it if there are other people out there in the world who would equally like that opportunity, if there are other people in the world who could do the job just as well, if there's other people in the world for whom they would feel just as satisfied if they had the job, then why is it so important that you in particular are the one who gets it? Why is it so important that you are the one that ends up with the job if all the reasons that you want it also apply to other people? And this is what Mill is getting at here. When we're so attached to our own personal happiness, when we're so attached to things going our particular way, it makes us very dependent on fortune and luck to live a happy life. And so he says, if you want to protect yourself against that, then the best thing you can do is learn how to sacrifice or put your own happiness aside. So he continues, for nothing except that consciousness can raise a person above the chances of life. By making him feel that, let fate and fortune do their worst, they have not power to subdue him, which once felt frees him from excess of anxiety concerning the evils of life. You won't need to feel anxious about things that could happen negatively to you if at the end of the day you're not so concerned with your own personal happiness but the happiness of the whole. And he compares this, you'll remember a similar idea came up when we looked at the Stoic Epictetus. And he says, this enables him, like many a Stoic in the worst times of the Roman Empire, to cultivate in tranquility the sources of satisfaction accessible to him without concerning himself about the uncertainty of their duration. So if you can learn to be at peace with the idea that if things don't go your way, other people will benefit, the total amount of happiness in the human community will still be increased. If you can learn to be comfortable with that, that's the surest path to being happy. Now, to be clear, and this is a point that Mill wants to make as well, there is a sense in which utilitarianism requires self-sacrifice. But it's not just self-sacrifice for the sake of self-sacrifice. He's explicit here. He says, a sacrifice which does not increase or tend to increase the sum total of happiness it considers as wasted. So you should be able to be willing to put your own happiness aside. But only if doing so is ultimately going to create more overall total happiness. That's what the utilitarian morality, at the end of the day, thinks is most important. Okay. Now, one of the things I want to do is look at how this sort of idea, look at how it might have a practical application. And I said we're going to be looking at the ethics of giving to charity, and we're going to do that more in the next video. But here I want to introduce you to this movement that's known as effective altruism. Okay, so what is this effective altruism unit? Not unit, but movement. It's easiest to break it down into both of its parts. So first, effective altruism, well, it's altruistic. And what is altruism? It just means doing something for the sake of another person. You're motivated by, you have a concern for other people's well-being, you want to help them, etc., etc. That's what altruism is. And one common way, not the only way, but one way of being altruistic would be to donate your money to charitable causes that help other people. Now, the first question to ask yourself is, suppose someone has decided they would like to give money to charity. They think this is be a good idea. They want to be a charitable person. They want to help others. What is the very first sort of question, or what's the first way that that person might go about deciding what charity should I give to? Well, oftentimes when people are in that situation, they'll say, well, perhaps I'll give to cancer research because there's a cancer survivor in my family. Perhaps I will donate to the local food bank because I want to help my local community. Right? You can think of tons of examples, but in most cases, when people think about how to give money, how to be charitable, they donate to causes they have some sort of personal connection with. Maybe they experienced what the cause is fighting against. Maybe someone in their family did, etc., etc. And that's all fine and well. But the effective altruism movement says, well, maybe that shouldn't be our first concern. Maybe your personal connection with whatever the cause is shouldn't be your primary concern. Instead, maybe it should be, and this is really sort of inspired by utilitarian doctrine in some sense, maybe your first concern should be, how can I get the most bang for my buck? How can I do the most good possible with every single dollar I donate? And there are sites such as, I have one example here, givewell.org, where they compile data on various charities and recommend the top most efficient and effective charities that take your dollars and save the most lives possible, that bring the most happiness into the world, that prevent the most suffering. Right? And so, for instance, these questions come from a philosopher, Will MacAskill, who in a recent book, I think it was published 2015, called Doing Good Better, he says when you're thinking about where to give your money to a charitable cause, these are the sorts of questions you should ask. And they're honestly the sorts of questions that you should ask anytime you're making a purchasing decision. Right? So if you're going to buy a new car, you wouldn't say, well, I'm automatically going to buy a car that's red, no matter if the only car that's red on the whole lot is one that's a beater, it's in horrible shape, no one wouldn't drive it. Well, too bad, I'm going to buy that car because I'm really attached to the color red. No, you would ask, well, what's the gas mileage? How safe is it? Right? All these sorts of questions where you make sure you're getting the most benefit for your dollar. What's the price? So he says when you're thinking about where to donate your money, you should do the same thing. You should ask questions like, how many people benefit? Is this the most effective, even if it's a beneficial way of spending my dollar, is it the most effective way of spending my dollar? Is this a neglected area? This is often a question that people do not usually think about. For instance, there's common charities, like the Red Cross or other organizations like that, which are fine organizations. But in many cases, these organizations get tons of donations. They're not underfunded. So perhaps your dollar could be better spent at a foundation organization that's underfunded currently and needs more resources. Right? And so you can, if you visit givewell.org, and I'll show you this briefly. You see, they say that we search for the charities that save or improve the most lives per dollar, and they recommend a couple. I think it's a list of like 10 different charities. So the Malaria Consortium, Against Malaria Foundation, Evidence Action's Deworm the World Initiative, Sight Savers, Give Directly. Right? These are all the top charities that GiveWell has recommended this year based on their empirical research, and they update this every single year. So every year they reevaluate the charities, they change the list as they see fit based on their data and research. Okay, so one of the things, and one of the interesting things about the effective altruism movement is when you start to think, or you do a little research or searching into the people who are really into this movement. Because at first you might say, wow, this is an incredible sacrifice of oneself. Because you say, well, think about the time and energy I've got to spend, researching which charities are most effective, finding that data, that's a lot of time and energy. And then there's also the monetary sacrifice of actually giving my money to those organizations. What's interesting about this is, this is from a blog post on givewell.org. It's by one of the people who works there, who's a part of this movement. And this person is responding to the claim that her work as a part of givewell.org is a true sacrifice, or her work in effective altruism is a sacrifice of her own happiness. So here's what she says. I'm always a bit put off when I see effective altruists being characterized as selfless or sacrificing. We don't consider ourselves unusually selfless. Altruism is a source of joy, not something for which joy is traded. And I think this goes back, and to some extent, to Mill's point previously. What those in the effective altruism movement will say, what many utilitarians will say, is that yes, acting for the sake of the greater good, sacrificing my own immediate desires and pleasures in the moment, can seem like a sacrifice, but the joy I get in knowing I'm doing my part to improve the human community more than outweighs that sort of concern. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of insight into sort of the utilitarian mindset. And I want to bring to your attention one other passage from Mill on the principle of equality. So he states the following. I must again repeat what the assailants of utilitarianism seldom have the justice to acknowledge. that the happiness which forms the utilitarian standard of what is right in conduct is not the agent's own happiness, but that of all concerned. So here's a clear statement of the principle of equality. This is not in any way a selfish doctrine. It's the happiness of all concerned that matters. And then the next point, in the next sentence, what Mill's going to tell you is, what is the sort of standpoint, what is the sort of point of view that a utilitarian ought to take? And here's what he says. As between his own happiness and that of others, utilitarianism requires him to be as strictly impartial as a disinterested and benevolent spectator. In the golden rule of Jesus of Nazareth, we read the complete spirit of the ethics of utility. To do as one would be done by, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, constitute the ideal perfection of utilitarian morality. So he says a couple things here. He says that the utilitarian morality is really just an expression of the golden rule as stated by Jesus, which is up for interpretation, I suppose, whether that's really what the golden rule is getting at. But the previous sentence is what's really interesting to me. He says that a good utilitarian is both impartial and benevolent. Both impartial and benevolent. That is actually a very strange combination. Because if you're benevolent, that means you care about other people. You want what's best for them. You will the good of another person. If you're impartial, that means you don't have any stakes in the game. You're not going to privilege one person over another. So, the perfect example of benevolence would be someone like a parent. A parent is very much concerned for the good of their child, and often concerned for the good of their child to the exclusion of other children. Parents will go to great lengths to make sure that their child gets what he or she needs, even if it comes at the expense of others. This is very common parental behavior. But an impartial person would be a person that, doesn't have a stake in the game, who says, I'm going to treat everyone equally. And so it's very weird that these two words are going together here. And this is one way to think about it. So here you are, and let's say you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to take a wide view of all of humanity. So you look down, here's what I'll call the sea of humanity. It just includes all human beings. Who does it include? You, your family, your friends, your fellow citizens, strangers you've never met, every single human being. And what Mill is telling you to do is to be benevolent toward these people, toward the sea of humanity, to care about all human beings. And he's telling you to do that impartially, to care about all of these individuals equally. And notice how strange that is. Because think about the way your benevolence would normally function. Normally, your benevolence would function in the following way. Here you are, and you'd have your strongest ties of benevolence to your family, then toward your friends, then maybe your fellow citizens who live around you. It's weaker here. And towards strangers, it's much, much, much weaker. So normally, benevolence is very partial. It's not equal at all. But what Mill is telling you is that a good utilitarian cares about all human beings and cares about them equally. And this is a very, very, very difficult mindset to get into. So one way to think about this is think about the process of moral development for a child. Now, for a child, in the earliest stages of their life, they can hardly be concerned about anyone else besides themselves. It's even hard for a child to recognize that other people, exist in any meaningful way. And it's only as the child begins to grow that they can say, oh, okay, well, there are other people in the world. They, just like me, have interests. They have desires. They have things they want. They have feelings just like I have. And so perhaps I have to find a way to cooperate with them. And so the first thing is an impartial benevolence, a complete benevolence for the entire sea of humanity is very uncommon, but it's a very highly developed moral way of thinking. Because how often in your own life, you're an adult now, you're not a child anymore. How often in your own life do you find real feelings of benevolence even going beyond your friends? Probably not that often. And if you think about, commercials that are encouraging you to give money that will help a poor and starving child, think about what it is those commercials do. They don't just talk in a very clinical way. Here are the stats. If we have this much money, this the amount of lives we can save. Right? They don't take that sort of approach. They take video or a picture of a child, and they put it right in front of you on the television. You see these children who are suffering, and the whole reason they're doing that is to establish an emotional connection. Because it's very hard. In the abstract, we don't usually have feelings of benevolence towards strangers, toward people we don't know. In order to create those feelings, the images are used to make you feel more of a human kinship with those other individuals. So the point here is that there is a sense in which utilitarianism can be quite demanding. It does demand a level of benevolence that perhaps is not completely natural to the human mind. And because it's not completely natural to the human mind, Mill understands that if we want to adopt this perspective or encourage it, we would have to take active steps. So he says, as the means of making the nearest approach to this ideal, utility would enjoin, first, that laws and social arrangements should place the happiness, or as speaking practically it may be called the interest, of every individual as nearly as possible in harmony with the interests of the whole. So first, if we want this to actually be the case, if we want this to be realistic, we need to live in society where your interests are tied up with the interests of other people, where we're all sort of have a common interest in society going well. And secondly, that education and opinion, which have so vast a power over human character, should so use that power to establish in the mind of every individual an indissoluble association between his own happiness and the good of the whole. What is really needed is a change in the way we think about our own interests and the interests of others. One question to ask yourself is, why is it that you might be able to find yourself as being happy even though you know many other people are suffering? Why would you think, right, or I would put it this way, how might you think that your happiness can still be something you pursue even when you know that many other people are having a hard time? How is the fact that many other people are suffering, starving, and destitute in dire poverty, how is that not something that actually lowers or undermines your own happiness? And so for Mill, if we're going to truly achieve the sort of mindset that he talks about, where we're benevolent and impartially benevolent to the entire sea of humanity, we need to bring it about that we start to understand that our happiness is tied up with the happiness of all other human beings. Okay. So we're going to stop there with the principle of utility. In our next video, we will pick up by talking about charity more specifically. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.